So the aim of my presentation is to describe the interaction between mainly sheep farming and white-tailed eagles in Scotland. I'm going to elaborate on Andrew's slide from the previous talk on agricultural conflict and just go into a lot more detail about what's being done with that and the background to sheep farming as well. So I'll start off with explaining that and what we're doing to deal with the conflict between white-tailed eagles and sheep farming. So again, kind of recapping on what Andrew described earlier, white-tailed eagles were extinct in Scotland during the early 1900s due to human persecution, mainly because of change in land use, the impact on lambs and shooting estates, etc. And they were successfully reintroduced in 3 phases, 1975, 1993 and 2007 in Fife. And now we're up to 113 pairs across Scotland in 2017. They're protected by law under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which protects them against disturbance, intentional reckless disturbance, and also it protects their nest sites as well. So their nest sites are completely protected and not able to be removed. So livestock systems in Scotland. So 55% of Scotland's agricultural land is dedicated to sheep farming, mixed sheep and beef cattle in the uplands. The land is disadvantaged in terms of agricultural production. It's categorised as less favourable area due to its poor soil and short growing season and our terrible climate. There are about 2.6 million breeding ewes in Scotland, according to a survey in June 2016. 58% of these sheep are in flock size of 500 or more breeding ewes, so quite large flocks. Many of these are kept and managed through extensive hill farm systems of over 1,000 hectares. So huge extensive systems on the hill in the most challenging environments and livestock managers have limited contact with their stock during the year. This contact sometimes can be limited to 4 occasions during the year. So tapping, which is putting the ram to the ewe, which happens in November and December. Marking the lambs around about 2 to 12 weeks, which usually happens around about May. And clipping in July. Sometimes marking and clipping on some occasions, especially in the more difficult terrain, happens at the same time. And then gathering for sales again in August. So that's kind of only 3 occasions where livestock managers might actually have any contact with their livestock on the hill during the year. As a result of this, there are quite a significant amount of what we call black losses, which are losses of lambs that are unexplained, could be down to predators, not just eagles, foxes, for example, as well, diseases, parasites, and other reasons. But black losses are unexplained losses. So obviously, a lot of these black losses are attributed to the sea eagle. As well as this, also with the management of hill farms, a lot of agricultural pests like rabbits have been removed from these systems as well. And also with the intensification of livestock management, a lot of other species such as hares and kind of upland birds have also disappeared from these hill areas as well. So there's a reduction in natural prey as well for sea eagles in these environments. Also, the scrub layer has been removed to maximise grazing potential, and that has also removed a lot of shelter that would be available otherwise to livestock from predators. So most livestock production in Scottish hills would probably not be viable without financial support from the less favourable area support scheme and single farm payments. So the conflict between lambs or sheep farmers and sea eagles began in the 1980s when the first successful nest appeared on Mull in 1985 and the population began to establish on the west coast. So as well as large proportions of black losses being attributed to white-tailed eagles, some viable lambs are also being reported as taken. So the losses for some farmers reported losing on average 11% of their lamb crop. This statistic was taken from the National Farmers Union Scotland and is an estimate. I think it's very difficult to quantify how many lambs are lost each year, especially in some hill systems as well. The losses for farmers isn't just the value of a single lamb that's going to market. It's also replacement ewe stock, especially ewes who are hefted onto the hill, so ewes who are born there and retain that area for their lives, and also the lambs that are then born to maintain that tradition as well. There's also health issues for ewes who lose lambs during the year as well, and how that affects their productivity in the future if they have lost a lamb at an early stage. So the National Farmers Union of Scotland they've kind of accused the conservation bodies of not consulting them sufficiently during the reintroduction stage of the recolonization of sea eagles. And they're accused of being insufficiently concerned about the potential impacts on sheep farming. And this is where the conflict exists at the moment. So with hill lambs already challenged by marginal conditions, the timings of sheep activity or lambing also happens to coincide perfectly when the demand for prey is greatest from the sea eagle. So you can see here, this is kind of like a little calendar, if you like, of sea eagle activity versus sheep activity. And when lambing is kind of at its peak, and when young lambs are being turned out onto the hill, this is when the sea eagle chicks hatch in Scotland. So the timing is almost perfect. So it comes as no surprise, really, kind of with the timing, with the impoverished ground, the challenging climate, the removal of natural prey and shelter, that it's no wonder that lambs are actually an attractive option, viable or not, to white-tailed eagles in Scotland. Because of this conflict, some studies were taking place to quantify the lamb losses to sea eagles and the economic impact as well. So Mick Marquis, between 1999 and 2002, did a very detailed study on the diet of sea eagles on the Isle of Mull off the west coast of Scotland, which in the early days was a core of the population. And they attempt to quantify the losses of viable lambs, the economic impact of those losses, and also to make some recommendations based on their findings as well. Most lambs killed were not viable or had been scavenged already, so there were already underlying health issues. There were lambs found in all of the nests that were studied. I think 17 nests were studied in great detail. So lamb were found in all of them, but the ones that were found killed had already had underlying health issues. There were some that were healthy that had been killed. The numbers of lambs also varied each year. And that was mainly due to the predisposition of the lambs. But underlying flock health issues and parasite load was a large contributing factor to this as well. Further research was done in Gairloch in the northwest of Scotland in 2009, where radio collars were fitted to lambs to look at how many of these lambs ended up in sea eagle nests. And during that study, no lambs were found to be killed at all. In fact, 5 of them were scavenged. So based on the recommendations in this paper by Mick Marquis, the sea eagle management scheme came to fruition. So with the main purpose was to concentrate on flock health, because this was one of the main factors that shone through from Mick Marquis' study, to deal with these underlying health issues and to deal with the fact that if the lambs are stronger, then maybe they'll resist predation. So the funding was made available from the Scottish Government through Scottish Natural Heritage to scan ewes for twins, because it appeared that twins or triplets, even lambs, were vulnerable to predation because a ewe could only defend one of the lambs. There's also money available for treating parasite load in the ewes, nutritional health as well, and supplementary feeding to improve the condition of the ewe so the lambs are born healthier. Extra shepherding as well was another option, because obviously having a human presence on the hill will deter the eagles further. We also trialled some scaring methods. So this orange device here is what we've been calling inflatable scary men. They're attached to a car battery and they inflate randomly every 12 minutes or so. And the idea is that they're moved around a lambing park. It's quite effective in in-by fields. Just to create a visual deterrent for eagles from in-by lambing parks. There was also funding available through the management scheme to fund capital works, so some larger scale long-term solutions to help prevent predation. So some farmers decided to build polytunnels so they could lamb inside polytunnels and turn the lambs out when they were bigger and more robust and less vulnerable to predation. Some fenced off some new lambing areas, and liming as well to improve the soil quality in order to just improve the nutrition as well. Also through the management scheme, there were incentives to realise the economic benefit of sea eagles. So if some farmers wanted to explore the tourism potential of sea eagles on their ground, there was also assistance to develop that. So the uptake of this scheme was pretty reasonable. I think during the first kind of phase of the scheme, there were around about 50 applicants. Unfortunately, with the attitude to this scheme initially wasn't ideal. A lot of farmers felt that by suggesting that their husbandry wasn't good was kind of patronising. So in 2014, there was a meeting between National Farmers Union and Scottish Natural Heritage and RSPB, and the NFU demanded an action plan and some more measures to be taken to improve the situation. So there's a couple of things that have happened to develop the management scheme since this initial scheme to help improve flock health. So there's been a national stakeholder group has been established. So there's representatives from the farming and crofting community and conservation bodies who discuss on a national level what can be done now to improve the situation and the dialogue between the organisations. There's also local stakeholder groups have been formed in the two areas where the greatest amount of predation is thought to occur. And this enables a dialogue to take place on a more local level and more local issues to be discussed. The local stakeholder groups, also there's partners from Forestry Commission as well and RSPB, and a lot of input and ideas are discussed between these groups, and also it's really improved the relationship between these organisations where a civilised discussion can be had now around a table as opposed to a more heated discussion. Another thing that has been introduced is what we call call-off contractors, or a quick response service. So that's individuals. There's myself and Matt in the audience here are one of these contractors, and our role is to respond as quickly as possible to any reports of livestock predation and to investigate what's happened. So this is the kind of thing we might be called to look at. Sometimes there's a carcass, sometimes there isn't, but the circular pluckings in a field, missing lambs, often associated with sea eagles being seen on site. So our job is to listen, to gather as much information as possible, to make some observations, to offer advice if there's something that they can do to help reduce this, but also to assist their application onto the management scheme, and if there's any funding available to them to help prevent issues in the future. This has also greatly improved communication and rapport as well between Scottish Natural Heritage and the farmers on a local level, and it's also kind of helped stimulate some discussion and some thinking on behalf of the farmers on how we're able to live alongside this predator as well. There's a kind of increase as well in what the management scheme is able to offer. Previously, the scheme was closed to people out with 5 kilometres of a sea eagle's territory, but now the scheme is open to any farmers across the range of sea eagles, which is across Scotland, including the east of Scotland as well. They're also taking into account the effects of young sea eagles and the impacts on hogs as well. There have been some reported cases of young sea eagles and adults attacking hogs, so overwintering lambs, so lambs or sheep that are around about kind of a year, nearly not quite a year old yet. And sometimes the sea eagles might kind of hit them or damage them, but not necessarily kill them, but have an effect on them as well. There's more creativity and flexibility in the tools available. So the scaring devices are kind of being used more creatively, but there's also, if a farmer can think of a way that they might be able to deter sea eagles, then that's open to some suggestion as well and some assistance from the contractors. As where possible, we post-mortem all lambs that are recovered. Sometimes they're in pretty bad condition, so it's very difficult to glean any information from them. But Scottish Agricultural College have been very supportive in helping with the postmortems as well as Matt here, who's also considered an expert in looking at carcasses. And that helps us to an extent to get to the bottom of the cause of death and also identify underlying health issues. And then that helps us make recommendations to farmers as well. Nest clearances as well take place wherever possible to try and help fill in the bigger picture, how many lambs do turn up in neighbouring nests as well. A couple of things we're going to experiment this year is with monitor farms. We'll be able to trial a little bit more intensively some different management techniques. We'll make far more intense observations of what's happening. So looking at how the eagles use certain farms who experience a high level of predation and help us get a better understanding of the bigger picture. So future goals, better understanding of what's going on, what's underpinning predation, better understanding of the effectiveness of our management options and how we can apply that to different areas. And also that will help us target our funding in the future. Ultimately, we want to improve our communication with farmers through the stakeholder groups, which is happening now. So our relationships are improving and hopefully empower and enable farmers to make a better judgments about predation and where their black losses are coming from, so we can get a more balanced view of what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time for 2 questions.
Вы изучали питание орлана белохвоста. Пожалуйста, хотя бы примерно в процентном отношении могли бы сказать, какую долю занимают овцы и какую долю занимает, допустим, рыба или другие группы животных?
So you have studied the diet of white-tailed eagle, and could you tell roughly what is the percentage of main food groups, including the sheep?
Including the sheep. It tends to vary between pairs, depending on where they're located. More inland pairs might depend more on hares, grouse, upland bird species, whereas on the coast, obviously, fish would be more significant. It's difficult to analyse prey remains, I suppose, from more coastal nests where fish is more prevalent because of how quickly they disintegrate and how much they appear in pellets. But it's a very diverse diet, I suppose, and it does depend entirely on what's available locally. The lambs tend to turn up more in nests where other prey species are no longer available. So if the land has been cleared or removed of alternative prey, but generally, kind of where there's an abundance of more natural prey, then lambs will feature less in the diet.